Welcome to a special edition of Feed Your Please, a hateful voyage through the Delta Quadrant. My name is Joseph.
I'm your co-host, Peter.
And we are taking a brief break from that Delta Quadrant voyage because this is a special episode coming to you thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Thanks to all you guys for keeping the podcast lights on. And as a thank you to those folks, we do an episode that stays exclusive to them for a while. And we leave it up to the community to vote on what we talk about. Last time, they did us the solid of telling us to review the TNG porn parody, which was amazing. So fantastic to be able to do that. Probably our finest work ever. But this time, it's a far more mainstream thing for fans to talk about, and that is possibly one of the best Star Trek movies made, Galaxy Quest. And we didn't just watch Galaxy Quest, though. We also watched the documentary Never Surrender, which is on Amazon Prime. So I basically double-headered it. I watched the movie, and then I watched the documentary right after. Certainly not my first time seeing the movie.
Do you know who did that documentary?
It was Screen Junkies, I believe.
The guys that do the honest trailers on YouTube.
It felt like a production at that level, you know? They kind of got everyone to do it. I noticed Sam Rockwell probably didn't really want to. He had the I don't want to be doing this vibe, but everybody else, like Sigourney Weaver, Tim Allen, they were into it. But
yeah, I've been watching a lot of behind the scenes stuff because this morning I actually watched a documentary on the making of the terrible, fucking miserable experience that went into making Island of Dr. Moreau. And if anybody out there is looking for an hour and a half to kill, I highly recommend that. That is one of the most insane production experiences I think that have ever happened in the course of humanity. So
I definitely agree with you. I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, but the stories have long since been like movie making legends, like literally cast members attempting to get the fuck away, like literally run away from doing the movie.
Yeah.
It's like the madness of late stage. God, the actor, the guy who played Dr. Moreau.
You're talking about. No, we both look terrible.
Yeah, one of the most famous actors of all time.
Marlon Brando,
yeah.
And even Val Kilmer, who has a special place in my heart because for, I don't know, the past 12 years, we have an ongoing joke where when we're at conventions and other places together and I get real drunk, I start telling people that I'm Val Kilmer's nephew and they believe me and I get special treatment.
Why not, right? That's a perfectly believable lie.
Thing. Like we all
you've blown it though. Now you've blown it. People will hear this. They'll know now. The word will get out.
I've got star power within the podcaster sphere now to supplant that. But we used to we'd read the Wikipedia and I was his nephew, and then we'd say that Nate was my bodyguard, and we'd work in other crazy roles. And like, who's gonna say no? I'm not Val Kilmer's nephew. Like, that's opened a few very lulzy doors for us.
Hey, listen, you can take the LARPer out of the game, but the LARPer never leaves the man.
Yeah, man.
I get it. I didn't see this movie until after it was out of theaters. I was definitely one of those people who saw the marketing for this and were like, oh, that doesn't seem right. It seems kind of like kind of a kid's movie. And I took a total pass on it. And it wasn't until it was out on DVD a few years later that I got told, like, no, this is actually really good. And I watched it. I know you worked at a movie theater. Did you see this when it came out?
No, and this is a very special time, right? So in high school, I worked for Regal Cinemas in Mayfield, Ohio. It was a 10-screen theater, 10 auditoriums. This came out in 1999. So I'm sure a big part of it was that I was working in a movie theater and I got to see movies for free. But it was also a really great time for movies and sci-fi movies. And, it's a simpler time. This is like kind of pre-internet. I remember the earliest, the best pirated movie that was out there was a 2-part file for The Matrix, which came out in 99, Green Mile. American Pie, Fight Club, and I've got an amazing Fight Club story. If anybody ever wants to ask me about that in person, I can't really.
Okay, that is too spicy for this
Way too
podcast.
spicy. But American Beauty,
Oh yeah, 99 was fucking baller for movies.
13th Floor, which was a weird one but a good one. Millennial Man, Blair Witch, House on Haunted Hill. I'm a huge Dark Castle fan. I mean, the list goes on. So much good stuff came in. You know, some not so much good stuff. Wild Wild West. I just saw the YouTube interview with Will Smith where he talks about passing on the Neo role so he could be in Wild Wild West, and the mistake that was.
Star Wars came out.
So
that was a huge deal. That was people skip work to watch that movie.
Deep Blue Sea, a motherfucking shark ate Samuel L. Jackson.
Oh, spoiler, dude! Come on, that's like the best fucking scene in that movie.
Yeah, well, they ruined it in Chappelle's show, so you know.
That's true. Okay, yeah. Shark ate me. Yeah, okay, yeah, it's true. If you haven't seen Deep Blue Sea, probably one of the most underrated movie of 1999.
Deep Blue Sea, you cannot get the soundtrack off of Spotify. I don't know. There's like some rights thing because I wanted to hear the deepest bluest sea by that was LL Cool J, but you couldn't. It's not in there. Anyways, what I'm getting to is that 1999 had a ton of great movies. I'm working at the movie theater. I was really looking forward to seeing Galaxy Quest, but the marketing on this movie was, as we will discuss in more detail later, completely bonkers. They completely mismarketed this thing as far as the target demographic they were going after. And I don't know what the details were. And I tried doing a little Googling to find out. But there was some argument somehow between New Line Cinema, which released Galaxy Quest, and Regal Cinemas. And as a result, I don't know who said fuck you first, but the end product was that no Regal Cinemas carried Galaxy Quest. So I never watched this thing in the movie theater because also when you work for a movie theater and you see movies for free, the idea of paying money to go see a movie or paying money for fucking popcorn, which I've probably eaten 6 times the amount of popcorn that a normal human man would have eaten, is ridiculous. So if it was not coming through our theater, I would refuse to watch it, to go somewhere and pay money for it. And I did not get to see Galaxy Quest. And that the fact that Regal Cinemas did not carry Galaxy Quest is kind of just like a smaller piece of the bigger picture, which is why did this movie not knock it out at the box office? What is the best Star Trek movie, a great sci-fi movie, a just, you know, the documentary we watched, Never Give Up, Never Surrender, it opens talking about the Pulitzer Prize winner who says, you know, there's only 4 perfect movies and one of them is Galaxy Quest. And how was this thing a sleeper for so long to turn into a cult hit today? And it just really feels like 101 different active efforts by New Line to like kneecap this thing.
I think the documentary is very enlightening to that specific question. And I do recommend the documentary if you haven't seen it. It's free on Amazon Prime, so if you got a Prime subscription, go check it out. Is that because DreamWorks was looking to market a family movie in December of 99 to make dollars on the holiday release schedule. And Tim Allen was a guy whose biggest movie to date was at that point, and still is, the Santa Claus movies. They're like, cool, Tim Allen's in this movie, cut it to a PG and put it, market it as a family movie, which is just the bloodless, marketing move. It's, I think, interesting though that cutting it to being PG made it feel more like Star Trek, because Star Trek was so PG on the tin.
Sheer fucking hubris of you to say that.
I mean, not anymore. Whatever they're making now. Yeah. Shut the fuck up.
Shut the fuck up.
I mean, before Picard took a greasy shit on us, I would say Trek was the quintessential PG, at least on television, the quintessential PG franchise. And it worked super well. I mean, We're not going to go through the plot of the movie scene by scene. We assume all of you listening to this have seen Galaxy Quest, probably multiple times. You don't need us to review it. But let's talk about like what in the movie just worked so well. And it's easy to say the casting. It's easy to say, you know, the fact that they obviously were really gentle with fan culture and uplifting it rather than making fun of it.
Because there's a million things we're gonna have to talk about down that train. Let's start with, you know, you and me being our normal sour selves and what's wrong with this movie. Okay, and I'm gonna directly plagiarize the work of Screen Junkies in their honest review of this, because it is literally the only bad thing I can say about it is, how are you gonna have a fucking movie with Sam Rockwell where Sam Rockwell is not dancing? Okay.
Sam Rockwell wasn't fucking in anything at that point, right? Like, was that a thing yet? I don't think it was by then.
So he's in Green Mile, which comes out along the same time, and
Right.
That's in the little interview we watched. You know, he did not want to do this movie out of fear of being permanently cast as comic relief, and they had to like really twist his arm to be in there. Apparently, up for that role of a guy, he beat out Ant-Man. I don't know. I'm blanking on his name right now. Paul Rudd, who is an amazing fucking human being. Have you watched the Paul Rudd Hot Ones interview yet?
Oh yeah, that's a classic.
This
is the broniest bro.
I know, like, what a fucking cool guy. But yeah, Sam Rockwell was a nobody at that time. He didn't want to do it, but because Green Mile coming out, which was a very stark contrast, he did, you know, agree to take the role and do it and knocked it out of the park. Yeah, he wasn't a thing. Nobody knew he was a great dancer. I don't care. I'm still holding it against the movie because some real missed opportunity there. And that's really where my criticisms end.
Yeah, everything else about this movie seems perfect. The cast is just nuts, right? Like, Alan Rickman is perfect for the role that they put him in. And his like dry British wit plays so perfectly well into the idea that they had for that character. You couldn't have gotten anyone better to do that. Sigourney Weaver's a great meta choice. Not only is she like good at being a serious actress, but she can be funny, and she is. I think the underrated gem of the film every time I watch it is Tony Shalhoub playing the tech sergeant, playing the engineer. He didn't have a lot of dialogue in the film, so he clearly decided to take a line that his character was a pothead, and he was just super chill now, and that's why he just didn't ever say a lot. And there are so many sight gags with him that just get me to laugh every time I see it. Like him eating his Lunchable as they are like going down in the shuttle down to the planet to get the fuel sphere. He's just grinning. He's just eating his Lunchable. Like when he gets teleported onto the ship and everybody else is freaking the fuck out, and he's like, wow, that was cool. You know, that was a hell of a thing. Like he's just he figured out a way to take a character that didn't have a lot of dialogue, that was really underwritten, and be like, well, if I'm not gonna have a lot of things to do in this movie, I'm going to do nonverbal things that are hilarious. And he fucking kills it.
I think that Tommy Weber, Daryl Mitchell, the helmsman, who was the child actor, you know, clearly in the vein, is like this amalgamation of Wesley Crusher and Geordie LaForge. His face acting and his reactions really get good laughs out of me as well. You know, that's the cast, and the casting for Jason Nesmith, you know, the captain that Tim Allen landed. Like hearing them talk about Mel Gibson as a possibility to be in the role, like,
that would have been a hell of a get in '99. I mean, like, take yourself back to '99. That would have been between Braveheart and The Patriot. That was like peak Mel Gibson period.
Mm-hmm.
So holy shit! Like,
who else did they advertise in there?
They talked about it said was Kevin Kline was like the guy they really wanted, who turned it down. They talked about getting Bruce Willis. They talked about getting Tim Robbins, but Tim Allen is perfect for that role. And I think that the decision they made to make him that he loves being the captain rather than resents it which is the opposite of Shatner, right? Like
Right.
the idea is he's a Shatner-esque guy, right? He's the swaggering, you know, captain of the not Enterprise. But in Shatner is displayed in pop culture because of the SNL skit of hating being the captain and the show Get a Life, all that stuff. Whereas this guy, the greatest part of his life is when he gets to act like he was actually that guy. And I thought that added so much to it because then you immediately buy into the idea of why he's super gung ho about, like, guys, I got us into a space adventure for real. We doing it. Come on. Like, because he wants to be the captain. It's the coolest thing he ever got to do. And Tim Allen is just one of those actors who has so much just natural charisma and has been criminally underused in his whole career. Like, this is probably his best movie, right? 20 years later, he never did anything
Absolutely.
better than this.
Yeah.
And I just think it's because it's just, I don't know why it's hard, but for whatever reason, people could never find a use for this. But this was perfect.
I think part of Tim Allen too is that he's got that Disney money coming.
Yeah,
So you go into the Disney stable on voice acting, which fairly enough, Woody, right? Um, Geez, why can't I think of names tonight?
hey, we can't. Tom Hanks, but
Tom
we
Hanks.
can't remember actors today.
No, it's the movie day. Tom Hanks, certainly isn't limited by his Disney association, but he was also a box office juggernaut, whereas Tim Allen had more of the TV sitcom coming out on that, splashing hard into that Disney money. And obviously, he's got politics chaining him down a little bit, but that wasn't the
But
case
that
in the
was more,
early
yeah.
2000s.
That not at all. Like that's more recent. Like the whole him being like not in politically in sync with the rest of Hollywood was basically since like what 2016, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
Though his show's still going. I guess that's really the really maybe the reason why Tim Allen hasn't had a big movie career is that, I mean, the man has been doing Last Man Standing since 2011. Like that show's been on, his second sitcom's been on the air for 10 years. Like that, he's comfortable doing TV. So maybe that's the real reason. But anyway, he's fucking great. He nailed exactly like a unique way to portray this character of I'm Shatner, but I like it, rather than I'm Shatner and I'm secretly resentful. And there's a nice balance in that between all the cast members. Having Rickman be the one that resents it is perfect because he's got the dry British wit element to go along with it. And of course, he's got all the talent, right? Like as far as like raw acting talent, he's the most gifted one of them all. And they ask him to carry some emotional weight in the movie that I think is probably best suited for him anyway.
Yeah. The crazy revelation to me in watching the documentary was that this was initially Ivan Reitman.
No, it wasn't Ivan Reitman. It was because Ivan Reitman directed Ghostbusters. You're thinking of Harold Ramis.
Oh,
Harold Ramis was going to be the director. But yeah, the documentary goes into great detail that the original director attached to the film was Harold Ramis, and he ended up walking away because the sense of humor they were going to go for with Tim Allen was different than his, which is probably right. Like if you watch Harold Ramis movies, they are very dry, right? But that's what's funny about it. And this isn't a dry movie, it's a heart-filled movie, which I think worked in its favor. And so having a director that was willing to basically go with that, I think was a much better call. Not that Howard Ramis is one of the best, comedic minds ever to live, but he's got a style and he was self-aware about it, which is neat that he kind of like, all right, well, I'm not going to do this movie because I think I would fuck it up. He had some real fucking stinkers in his career, so it's very true.
Yeah. The movie serves as an excellent time capsule for a transitional period in fandom.
Yes.
At the heart of this movie, at the core of this movie is the convention scene. And I have had the unique opportunity of having been part of these conventions for, I don't even know, 25-ish years. And I will tell you that the early 90s Star Trek convention and just sci-fi and comic book con scene in general was a wildly, wildly different creature than what we have today. And we've talked about it in the past, but I mean, you've got, I can personally speak to Origins, Gen Con, and the best of the bunch, Dragon Con. I haven't gone out for Comic Con on the West Coast, but just Dragon Con really like the wild entertainment complex that is versus Star Trek conventions in the early 90s where it's literally, the conference room at a Ramada Inn, next to the airport. Uh, it's real. So when you see the first opening shots in this movie, and it's funny because you've got the stars up on the stage, and then you've got the crowd out in folding seats. And then behind that, you can see the merchandising, right? And part of me was like, okay, well, they're just trying to show you a complete composite of a con scene. Because certainly conventions now, the merchandising would be nowhere near the event space. Like Dragon Con merchandise is its own 5-story building 3 blocks up the street, and you have these ballrooms bigger than football fields, that they pack in for people there to see Patrick Stewart and the other big names. But in reality, yeah, like back in the day, you would have everything in the same floor space. You would have the stars that you were there to see within easy reach of plebes. They weren't getting special escorts through back hallways with security details. Like I myself almost pushed TV's Batman, Adam West, down the stairs at the Mid Ohio Con in '98 because did I ever tell you that story?
No, but please do now.
So I was working at the movie theater, and there's a bunch of nerds working at the movie theater, and I was a young kid. This might have actually been 95, I think, because I was young, and they brought me down. I had never been to Columbus, 2.5 hour drive away from Cleveland, with people I didn't really know. So that was like a big deal for me. And we went to this Batman panel, and the whole time we were there, this manager who I worked with, Pat ties very closely into the Fight Club story. Jesus, we should
That
just
is
do
like, yeah, like maybe we should do a super special podcast where you just tell your movie theater stories. Like it should be something you have to ask for. Like,
yeah. Well,
we need your consent before we let you hear this.
TLDR, he stole a bunch of Phantom Menace cups when he quit the movie theater. This guy's a bastard. But like the whole time, he keeps like nudging me from behind with his shoulder, like walking into me, which is just dumb fooling around stuff. And finally, like I had enough, and I flipped out, and I was like, Pat, if you fucking bump me again one more time, like I'm done with you. I'm gonna knock you the fuck out. Just stop. So we go to this Batman panel for the Adam West Batman series, and it's like the Joker and Burt Ward and Adam West. I'm sorry, it wasn't the Joker, it was the Riddler, and I think the Penguin was in there, and I don't know who else. And it's like a bunch of nerds jammed in a real little room with Adam West and these stars. And I mean, you could have thrown a fucking, a wadded up piece of paper and hit these guys. Like, you don't get to be that close with people anymore in conventions. And this thing let out, and we're all piling out of the convention room and going back into the main hall. And sure enough, I get this fucking shove in my back, and I'm like, okay, well, Pat, I fucking warned you. And I saw that there was like stairs going down to the lower lobby, and it had like that thick hotel carpeting. And I'm like, all right, well, Pat can probably survive this if I shove him down these fucking stairs. Motherfucker. And I spin around, and I just go to shove him down the stairs in this fit of rage. And I turn around, and got my fucking hands on Adam West, and I'm about to shove him down the stairs. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ, dude, I'm sorry. And he seemed very confused, and I was very scared that I almost just shoved TV's Batman down the stairs. And my friends are looking at me like, what the hell? And I'm like, I thought it was Pat pushing me in the back. And they're like, oh. And that's the Wild West of the 90s cons. I got tons of crazy. Geez, I don't even know if I can tell these stories, but I got tons of crazy stories like that from that early 90s con scene, because these things were so small. When I watched crazy pre-accident crazy Gary Busey beat the hell out of those white trash guys. Um, like crazy ass shit would go down at these, and Galaxy Quest really captured that, because when you move into the scenes of Tim Allen going into the bathroom where he overhears
People
the
talking
asshole
shit. Yeah.
saying like, "Oh God, these guys don't understand their jokes. $15 for an autograph," which let me tell you, Dragon Con pricing is way higher than $15 for a fucking
Yeah.
signature. I'll tell you that right now.
It's a bargain by today's standards.
But the concept that uh, a featured guest would be using the same public bathrooms as the con attendants just seems, by today's standards, so incredibly crazy. But my wife's sitting there watching the movie and she's playing around on her phone, and she said apparently that exchange there really actually happened to William Shatner, and that's what really clued him in for the first time that there was a rift in the cast, that people did not like him, and that there was it soured him to the entire Trek fandom and exposed their own conflicts. And so, yeah, maybe once upon a time you did have the big names sharing, urinal stalls with average Joe.
Yeah, I wasn't really like into going to stuff like cons and that sort of thing until a little later. It was the early 2000s for me. But even then, like, it's exact kind of situation is the people invited to the conventions just weren't like protected from the proletariat like in the same way that they are now, and you catch them just walking around talking to people. And like I remember a very resurgence Will Wheaton. Once I got into a 25-30 minute conversation randomly about hockey, just like he was just chilling out, and I knew he was a big LA Kings fan, so like want to talk to him about hockey. And it was much different time then. And it definitely is. I think the most interesting part of talking about Galaxy Quest is, boy oh boy, is fan culture both different in reality and portrayed differently. This movie could not be made now. Being a fan of something could not be so unironically embraced as positive in the year of our Lord 2020. Like, not a chance. Like, this occurred just before the internet took off, and boy oh boy has the internet both made fandom much more interesting, accessible, and straight garbage. And
Oh yeah.
there is no better example of that than the two of us.
Yeah.
and that's what makes it so meta and interesting for us to talk about, is that here we are. We have a podcast that's like 120 episodes deep, mostly discussing a television show that hasn't been on the air in 2 decades. Okay? And we're not the first, the second, or even the third podcast that you can listen to that's doing that. Right? And there's more coming out behind us.
You
So
even
we're not
have
even the last.
the stars of the show doing a podcast in service of their own body of work. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, the accessibility of fandom allows for jabronis like you and me to buy Blue Ice mics and get a subscription to a web app so that we could do a podcast every week about a television show, which is cool because A, we enjoy talking about Star Trek, and now we get to do it and broadcast it to other people, and B, a bunch of people listen to it. What the fuck, right? Like, all of a sudden there's all these doors that open. Like, our group of people listen to our podcast. We've got people who are in across the world that listen to it. Certainly not based in Ohio, certainly not based in the United States. We got fans who are in Britain, we got fans who are in Eastern Europe. It's crazy. So that part's really cool. And that's way different than what you see here, where fandom is still portrayed as very niche and almost shameful, right? And the big emotional climax for the fan element of the movie is Justin Long's character, where at the end his fandom is rewarded with being able to do the thing that every fan fantasizes about, which is, you know, bail out the Enterprise because Captain Kirk calls you, right? Like, oh, and shout out to Justin Long, who A, has not aged, and B, is really good at impressions. I didn't know.
Absolutely.
That
His
was
Marty
fun to watch.
McFly was excellent.
All of his stuff was his Sam Rockwell was impressive.
The fandom thing, you know, the tipping point there was the corporate greed, really. And I think that's a big part of what has kind of soured a lot of the fandom out there, is that the suits have realized that rabid fan loyalty equals dollar signs, and that fostering those fan experiences guarantees asses in seats and eyeballs on screens. So, you know, a lot has really been done to facilitate and protect and elevate these elements. And the, you know, when I'm saying the suits, it's the stars as well. Like, you know, once upon a time, Shatner used to shun Trekkies for living in their mom's basements and this and that. And now, you know, everybody understands you don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't shit on the people who are putting money in your pocket. And with the internet and everything else that's come out, it's been easier to build these fan groups, and stuff like Comic-Con, you know, is entertainment industry complex, like launching points, right? That's raw market data. That's the big splash when these Marvel movies and stuff come out to build that hype and launch empires. The flip side to that becomes that, you know, it's not really a grassroots fan experience anymore.
Yeah.
It's trying to appeal to everybody. And we've certainly butted heads with, you know, other Trek enclaves out there. And you can say, you know, well, you're not a real fan because you like this, and you're not a real fan because you don't like that. I don't know how that sort of stuff really existed pre-internet. I don't know what kind of community self-policing used to go on. Maybe the numbers weren't there to have, you know, divergent opinions to the degree we see now. But with the protected status of being a nerd and the aversion to any sort of conflict, I feel like there's certainly been a watering down. And you get people who, I don't know, maybe the reasons they're there are different than the reasons other people. I don't know. It feels like it's a lot of time it's a corporate amusement park instead of a fan club. And
Yeah, and I think it's a generational divide to a degree on that as well. I agree with you, and I think you're illustrating an excellent point in that with fandom becoming more corporate, it's expanded, and by making it less a tight knit local in person experience and making it an impersonal worldwide experience, the larger those groups you get, the more likely it is you get people who, even assuming the best of intentions, are going to come at it from a different angle. And like cosplay is a perfect, I think, way to synthesize that, because that's not a new concept. People have been dressing up in costumes of their favorite things since Trekkies were invented in the 70s, right? People were wearing, you know, their home stitched Starfleet uniforms since that could possibly be a thing. But there's a difference between that and a whole subset of people who take it to just a professional level, right? Of recreating costumes and then going to these conventions and being paid to make appearances there and that sort of thing because their work is so impressive. And that's cool. I think cosplay is really neat, and particularly extremely well executed cosplay I admire as much as the next person. But is that a person who is a huge fan of the show or the franchise, has watched every episode and memorized the technical specs, and their love for it is so pure that they actually sat down and sewed a costume to go to the convention with? Or is it somebody who might, have watched some of it, have a familiarity with it, maybe a fan of it, but doesn't have that same level of investment in the properties that someone else would have, and is really just a way for them to express this other interest that they have. Like, oh, well, I maybe haven't watched every episode of Star Trek, but I definitely want to make a costume based on this alien that I thought was really cool design. So I'm going to go to the Star Trek convention as that, or that sort of thing. And, that's a pretty benign kind of difference, but it's the beginning of what becomes a much more fractured situation as you have more and more divergent groups that wind up being huddled into this big tent that is now being corporatized. And this movie is, like you said, it's a time capsule because it's before all of that happened. And being a nerd was bad. And because it was, everyone who was a nerd had to band together to have other people to talk to about. And that's what we see here is the kind of last vestiges of that. And when I say generational divide, it's like people like you and me went through that. We're in our 30s, our late 30s. And we were the last kind of group where being a nerd wasn't cool. Like the people behind us, knowing who Iron Man was just meant you went and saw movies, not that you collected comic books and that sort of thing. And I remember there was actually, it was Penny Arcade. Do you remember the comic Penny Arcade, the webcomic?
Yeah, I was thinking about that today.
Yeah, they did a whole series of comics about like how that changed, right? Where they're a little older than us, and they went, when they were kids and they were in high school and they were young, being a nerd got them beat up. And now it's a thing everyone thinks is okay. And back when they did these comics, it was like the early-ish 2000s, so it was like 2004, 2005. They were defensive of people claiming ownership over the things that they basically, bled over, in their opinion, right? Like, no, you don't get to come in and say you're this thing now, because I had to deal with some bullshit because I was into it before you. That's not okay. And I think there's a bit of that resentment still in the community of people who are super fans who have dealt with social inclusion as a consequence. Sometimes probably self-inflicted. Sometimes, it's their own fault. I think a lot of the time it's their own fault. I think you and I know people and have experienced people that it's their own fault. But at the same time, that's their perception, and it creates this negative feedback loop.
And if we're doing social commentary, wasn't it all of our goals once upon a time? Like, God, I wish more people were into this. I wish, these movies were more blockbusters. I wish comics were turned into larger properties. Like today in 2020, like all those wild dreams have come true. And, it takes changes to bring about those results. And it's easy to look back and say, like, we bled for this. How dare these Johnny come latelys? But like, that's really been the goal all along. And,
Oh yeah.
it's that human hipster, like I was into, fucking dingle hoppers before they were cool, sports or whatever.
What do you think the odds are that Dingle Hoppers is a band? Like 2 to 1?
100%.
You think 100%? I think it's okay. I was going to see if I can get.
I'm not going to justify that with a Google result, dude. I know dingle hoppers are a fucking.
It's a band.
It's built into human DNA to have that resentment to a certain level, and you got to be able to let it go and walk away from it. The nerd culture in this movie is unique in that for the time it would have been par for the course to just shit on people, and earlier in the movie it's no one's shitting on them, but you can see the tinge of a negative connotation, right? When Alan Rickman's sitting there signing pictures and like, kids in costumes are, talking to him about his character's moral code and like tech specs or whatever. And it's just kind of pissing him off. It's not shitting on him. It's not like he's like, oh God, you people. It's like he's got his own frustrations and he kind of vents on it a little bit to the kids. And again, that's very unique for a 90s movie. It embraces that culture. It recognizes it for what it is in a positive light, a truthful light. And in the end, you see it's a warm, accepting light. And that's really cool to see out of something from this time frame.
Oh, by the way, you're absolutely right. I don't want to discount anything you said. That I completely agree with you. But have in exploring some of the things we've been discussing. Justin Long, how old is he? Guess.
So they said he was 20 in this movie. So I can't do math shit.
40. He's 42. That man you saw on screen in that documentary, he was 42.
That's that West Coast Hollywood diet, man.
Yeah,
that's what happens when you don't eat meat.
That's fucking clean living.
You know, I feel like he kind of tainted himself with those Mac Switch ads. Like, that's what I'll always see him as, the Mac Switch guy.
Yeah, he did that with John Hodgman. I remember. Yeah.
He's been in some fun stuff. The other big cast...
F is for Family is like one of my favorite things he's been in lately. I don't know if you've watched it on Netflix. It's the animated series that Bill Burr does.
Yeah, excellent. My wife's a huge Bill Burr fan, so I get dragged into all of his stuff.
Casey always is a person who impresses me with her taste. So, and I'm not surprised to hear that.
Bill Burr's involvement with The Mandalorian is excellent because he was so vocally shitty towards Star Wars fans. So for him to end up in a Star Wars property, a very successful Star Wars property, and get a taste of some of that mouse money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other really cool casting thing out of this, because, you know, I love Mass Effect and you love Mass Effect, the bad guys in this movie. Part of this movie is, hey, the convention scene, nerd love, and the life and trials and tribulations of the Star Trek actor. The other part of this movie is a legit fucking Star Trek plot, right? Like, you strip out all the humor and all of the self-referential, tongue-in-cheek, OOC, you know, actor stuff, and if you just play this as a straight space adventure, it's pretty fucking legit. And that includes the Stan Winston, top shelf Jurassic Park ILM quality special effects on the ships, the explosions, and the aliens. So it's hard to make an alien. I mean, it was hard to make an alien back in Predator, right? Like, to make something that really stood out as plausible and scary and like intense. And I would say
not coincidentally, Stan Winston made that alien too. So, you know,
what is the world going to do, Joe, when Stan Winston dies?
Well, I mean, you know, fortunately, you know, he's had a lot of people work for him. So good thing. It's like what happened when Jim Henson died. You know, fortunately, a lot of people worked with him and carried on his legacy. But he certainly is responsible for inventing so much of what we basically enjoy.
Anyways, the bad guys in this movie, they're like lizardy, kind of buggy, like just intense dudes, and I think they really serve as a great figurehead of like an evil space race. They check all the boxes. The main bad guy's name is Saris, and did you recognize his voice?
I did not recognize his voice, so I expected to have my mind blown. Who was it?
Robin Sachs, who did the voice for Zaid Masani in Mass Effect 2.
Oh, okay, yeah. So, he was DLC. Underrated. I like Zaid.
It's really good, man. His access to the sniper rifle made him a big deal for me. Like, I like to go sniper rifle squads, and he was.
Oh yeah, he was fucking all of the DLC characters in every Mass Effect game were always OP. But that's the story of DLC. Like, it comes out and it's like, well, it's gonna be better than the shit that's in the game. So here you go.
Yep.
Shout out to all of the Thermian actors. Like, they definitely go into a lot of detail for them in the documentary. Of course, it's just a riot to watch them. Like, the idea of that they're octopus people.
Yeah.
And so they don't know how to walk, you know, and they're kind of doing this goofy shit. They have like underdeveloped sense of emotion. So they're very childlike, and all of the people playing them were 100% invested in doing that. And then you got to hear the stories in the documentary of like how they were all just cracking each other up, like coming up with all this backstory for it on their own, of like the things that you see them doing in the background of like how they walk with their arms was something they came up with. It wasn't in the script. They just kind of figured it out. All those guys were great. And it was fun to hear them talk about, how they kind of came up with all the canon on their own, and that like the Enrico Coltononi, the kind of the Malthazar, the head Thermian, he was like the the bad guy on set with Tim Allen, because Tim Allen would just be like cracking jokes all the time, like making fart jokes right before they said action, and he'd be egging them on by laughing at them every time.
You know,
Um,
he was just in Westworld season 3. I've been catching up on that, and he's got a real juicy role. So that was crazy to see him back in here. Obviously, you've got the guy Dwight Schrute from The Office, whatever his real name is. I'm
oh,
blanking
Rainn
on it right now.
Wilson, yeah.
And
Yeah, and
you know how
Malthazar
he
was,
was.
I remembered him more from being Veronica Mars's dad. I don't know if you ever watched Veronica Mars. It was Kristen Bell's first like big thing that she did. It was basically like a detective show, and he was like the sheriff of the town or whatever that they were from. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, this was Rainn Wilson's first real gig. It was Justin Long's first real gig. There was another Star Trek actor who's in it for like a half second. One of the three Thermians that greet them in the teleporting room is played by a guy who ends up playing a role in Enterprise. I forget the actor's name. He plays Crewman Daniels, who ends up being a really critical character in Enterprise later. I think they kind of missed that connection when they were doing the documentary. It seemed like it would be kind of a thing to point out that somebody wound up getting on Trek after being on Galaxy Quest.
I want to talk about the transporter scene because that was one of the two biggest moments. Like, if I had to break down my two favorite scenes in the movie, I would say the reactions of the crew as they are transported from Earth up to the star dock, and the trauma they have all gone through in this crazy physical stress in traveling across the galaxy. And before they can recover from that traumatic event, these fucking squid alien monsters blobbing their way in the door with a bunch of what looks like vicious metal cutting instruments, like buzzing them in their face as everybody tries to cope with it. And it's like, it's such a real moment of like, how is anybody supposed to be able to cope with this? And, they're like, oh, forgive us. They polymorph into their humanoid forms, like, oh, sorry, didn't mean to be rude. And when Sam Rockwell starts like screaming in horror along with the helm guy, it's like, that is exactly what a person should act like in this moment. And I love that. And then, of course, the other big standout moment for me is when the one guy dies, and then you've got
Oh yeah, like
Alan over him and gives the heartfelt "Grab Thar's hammer" quote, which brings tear to my eye every time.
yeah, like it's coming, and it's still brought a tear to my eye, and you it was a basic setup in the sense that like obviously this line represents his failure as an actor as far as he's concerned, right? That he's been typecast, which is the whole Leonard Nimoy problem that he had for years, or a lot of the Star Trek actors had. And I think the moment sells itself emotionally so well is that in the moment you see the switch in his brain, because he knows this guy's gonna die, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he knows like how meaningful this is going to be to him, and he like takes a breath, and his whole face changes when he goes to deliver the line, in the scene. And it's like that's how good Alan Rickman is that that's not in a script. You just are able to do that or you can't, and that's what makes it special.
I want to talk more about the scene because I wish I'd kind of had a better introduction to it in this, because it is such a huge part of the movie, and such a perfect example of like that story arc, which we've seen a dozen other times. Like that intersection point, not only is it fulfilling a dying man's wish, not only is it him growing past his own hangups, but like that entire like kind of story arc there when he meets the protege, and like finding out this while the entire crew has been easily bullied by this alien race, the green guys, because this dude has followed the teachings um, and broken away from the rest of his culture. He has survived where everybody else has been subjugated, and really set himself out in, like, the hands of illusion or whatever it's called, and like all these little funny pun gimmicks from his character in the TV show. This guy's been living in real life, and that is certainly something that's out there in the fandom. Like, Jedi is a real religion that people practice in real life right now. Uh, you've got these disciples of logic and all this other stuff that it's like, dude, that's not real. You shouldn't be. But people are living their lives like that, and that's what this guy's done. And he is, in that moment when he's dying on the floor, like, Rickman puts all those pieces together and kind of like realizes, like, this is real. This guy has made this real, and this thing that I've been hating for the past 20 years, um, there is value to it, and I have brought this value into my life, and I have bought in, and I've grown in the process, and made myself a better person through this guy's example of my example.
It can even be broken down, I think, more simply. It doesn't require you to be someone who believes, like, follows the teachings of the Jedi in real life. It's just as simple as a lot of the stories that these actors have of people coming up to them and saying, there's what you did in this show was so meaningful to me in my life and ended up being fundamental in who I became. Like, James Doohan used to tell a story where, somebody that he met at a fan convention said, like, I just, was in a bad place in my life, and I started watching Star Trek, and I loved Scotty, and I got into the idea of being an engineer, and decided I'm going to go back to school, and they got to kept coming to conventions, and eventually, like, made it all the way through school, and like sent him a picture of them with the degree, and like got to know, like, this person had a lot of problems, tried to commit suicide, and that Star Trek saved their life and allowed them to find a path through life, and that made what he was doing feel so much more meaningful to him, of like, wow, how can I as an actor ever top that, right? Like, I was on his TV show, and somebody identified it so completely that they were able not only to pull themselves out of a dark place, but then like find purpose in their life and find a passion and explore it. And you can't beat that, right? You can't beat having that kind of impact on somebody and feel like you've done something good in the universe. And that's what this moment represents for the whole film, is
Now
all of those experiences that those actors had like that,
what a it can be a uplifting, but also a burden to have that thrown on you for that first generation original series cast. Like, nobody there signed up to be a role model and have that kind of thing laid on them, and the things that original series cast had to shoulder moving forward. Like, what a wild unknown that this all could have turned into that, where you're saving people's lives, or you are becoming the center of obsession. Like, certainly with Next Generation forward, everybody knew goddamn well what they're getting into,
Right.
by the time, and that's one of the things we punch Voyager in the dick with heavily in season one, was like, you knew what you were getting into. You knew what the fandom was, talking to the writer and the showrunners. You knew the level of expectation and where the bar of standards were, and a lot of that sloppy work in the first and second season, we were not at all shameful in our criticisms, because everybody involved in this project knew goddamn well what they were getting into. Picard, same deal. Like, what the fandom is, what the level of expectation is, and if you do not raise to meet that challenge, shame on you, because you've brought this on yourself. But everybody in the beginning, man, like, it was uncharted territory, and again, this movie does a great job of showing, like, these people didn't necessarily want this to be what their life was going to be like, and to be saddled with all these emotional and societal obligations, but there they were with it, and how were they going to handle it in the beginning of the movie versus at the end.
Just to wrap up on the discussion, because we've actually already almost done an hour. It's just so much to talk about. Yeah, like, I knew that this would happen too. Like, even not talking about every scene in the movie, Galaxy Quest represents so much to fandom that you can just unpack a lot from it. But I found interesting that the Amazon reboot was actually going to happen. I remember them. I remember that news coming out that they had gotten everyone involved with the movie to actually do, and it was maybe going to be a limited series or something on Amazon for Galaxy Quest. And what actually prevented that from happening was Alan Rickman passed away. It was cool to hear. Like I'm familiar through Stevie because she's a huge fan
Harry
of
Potter.
Harry Potter, of Alan Rickman's reputation with his co-stars of being extremely supportive of their work and like going to all of their theater performances. He did that with all the Harry Potter kids who would like go to the stuff they did after Harry Potter and like, you know, be in the audience and support them. But he did that with guys from this movie too. One of the Thermians said that Alan Rickman was the first actor I ever worked with that wanted to be my friend. He was just a very friendly guy that was very supportive of his co-stars, and even one of them, the guy who actually played Quellic, the one that was kind of the bonded with him that he had the big scene with, was, you know, talked about like 6 weeks before he died. He came to a theater show and he was already looking really sick, and he just kind of lied. He didn't want anyone to know he was going to die, and it's this huge shame. Obviously, every time you hear stories about that, Alan Rickman was awesome, and this movie was incredibly elevated for him being in it. And it's a shame that, you know, he passed away and prevented us from seeing a what a return to the property would have looked like. But
well,
you know what?
Listen, man, Picard, did this
Yeah.
need? Should this have any sort of a sequel? Can we not just let perfect be good enough and leave it the fuck alone? Like, I'm not saying it's impossible and they couldn't do something with a mini series that would be entertaining and good, but the potential to just fuck something right into the dirt is so real. Like, just let it go, man. Let it sit on that shelf as a sterling example. And I'm not happy Rickman died, but I think at a certain level, I'm happy that they did not circle back around to this and plunder it for, you know, maybe it's a real desire to live in the universe, but you know, the cynic in me says, hey, all hell corporate. Someone sees money on the table and we see a rabid fan base, all that stuff we discussed earlier, and let's go into it. I I love these satellite Star Trek properties that can exemplify the core concepts that are great about Trek and not feel the need to take it to the next level, like Discovery and Picard, and can just say, you know what, 90s schlock is good enough for me, and I'm going to make a whole series around that with the Orville, or I'm going to make a movie about it with Galaxy Quest, and these things can be as good as they are. I love when I go to, you know, these conventions and I see a bunch of dudes um, in Star Trek uniforms, and now I'm starting to see Orville uniforms out there, and I've even seen a couple of the Galaxy Quest guy uniforms, and it's like, fuck yeah, man! It's different rights holders, but it's all really the same thing, and I love seeing it.
Same. And, you know, I think I wish we still lived in a world where Galaxy Quest was the rule and not something that feels so dated as to be impossible. I don't want to end this on too negative a note, but I couldn't escape the feeling while watching it and thinking back to Michael Chabon and him trying to defend his dumbass decisions with Picard on Instagram while giving interviews of talking about how every time they came across a concept that fans enjoyed, that they wanted to purposefully subvert it to piss them off. Um, Fandom is something to be celebrated, and you know, I really hope that over the fullness of time we can return back to a point where maybe it doesn't look exactly like the world that Galaxy Quest gave us, but still allows fandom to be something to be celebrated rather than opposed for the million reasons people feel like they need to oppose it. So this was a good topic. Thank you to our fans who suggested it. I look forward to, you know, we're trying to do these Patreon specific podcasts, a couple of them a year as a thank you. So, you know, we'll let this up for a few months and eventually make it available to everybody. And then at that point, we'll ask.
It's so funny
for new
that our
topics.
first Patreon was full penetration, boobs and dick Star Trek porn parody, and our second one was like so wholesome to the point where they couldn't even swear. I want to talk about the swearing. Apparently they
Oh
swear
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
crazy in it.
yeah. Okay,
The
yeah.
copy I watched, when Sigourney Weaver goes, "Oh fuck that," and she says, "Oh screw that," and it's very clearly been dubbed. And it happened, and my wife's like, "What?" And I'm like, "I don't know, man. Maybe I just
Oh,
got a goofy
that's
copy that
yeah,
like was
that's
edited
one of
for
the most
TV."
famous edits of all time. Like only I think the Die Hard Mr. Falcon TV edit might be more notorious.
But for me to find out through watching the documentary, like that was how it was displayed in the movie theaters, and that was just part of the play by New Line to say this needs to be a kids movie. We need that PG thing and get rid of all the profanity. And again, the story works. I'm sitting there, nobody's swearing, and I know it's petty for us to harp on Admiral Craft Services and the sheer fucking hubris or whatever, but like I don't want the profanity in my Trek. And even when I'm watching a jokey comedy movie, it still comes across as better Trek. I don't need that gritty, bleedy realism, whatever. Like it was a great moment in the movie to see that dub. It was even better to find out that that was intentional, and that's what people paying $12 back in '99 to go see that movie actually got. And the fucking like the confusion that I'm sure must have been on everybody in the audience's face when they saw that. Like how good, how good.
Yeah, the fact that it's never been fixed. Like there's never been like a director's cut of this, and I don't need one.
I
I
don't
don't
want it.
need I don't want to see the everyone curses edit. Like that is such a perfect, unintentionally hilarious moment. Like for our international audience, just in case my reference made no sense, the movie Die Hard 2, like many movies from the 80s, was given a TV edit. But Die Hard 2, being a very R rated action movie with not just violence but profanity to spare, received a number of questionable overdubs by someone who did not sound like Bruce Willis at all. And at one point, instead of saying yippee motherfucker, it was yippee Mr. Falcon. And it's become something of a meme, a famous meme here in the United States.
I want to say that I saw Casino on TV and they replaced "fuck you" with "thank you." That was a really good one.
Wow.
Oh, one last thing I want to say about the God. There's so many. I feel like we barely talked about the movie. We talked about everything but the movie. The part where they have the room full of bad guys they need to clear, and he's like, "Oh, that rock monster's still down on the surface," and like they suck the rock monster up and then beam it into the ship, and it rampages and like gets everybody blown into space. Like that was such a like an abusive D&D moment. I like, hey, here's this thing that was like dangerous plot before. Let's turn that into a weapon for us now and like abuse this super OP situation we were faced with earlier. Like so good. So good.
It just makes perfect sense too. Like it's a total fan move, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the thing you always talk about doing is using your teleportation device, doohickey, whatever you call it, for nefarious reasons. And of course,
It's also
they
about
pull
like
the trick.
why Seven of Nine being able to resurrect people from the dead was like a terrible fucking thing to introduce, because now nobody on Voyager should ever die because Seven of Nine can raise them with Borg pixie dust nanoparticles. And, you know, anytime you encounter situations, so well, back in season 4 or whatever, we did this. Why can't we do it now? And this was a great example of that. Like, hey, there was this super invincible rock monster. Why couldn't they just transport it up to the ship to do their dirty work? Oh yeah, they did that. Sweet, great. Use the toys on the table.
Thanks for your continued support on Patreon. And we will continue to catch you on our Hateful Voyage of the Delta Quadrant. And when time comes, you can count another poll for what you want Peter and I to ramble on about for an hour. And if you want those spicy Peter's youth as a theater worker, that might be like might be some OnlyFans level content. So
that's gonna have to be post COVID-19 in person with me patting you down to see if you've got any sort of recording.
So
I'm pretty sure most of those stories will get me in jail still.
So
it was a
sorry.
different time.
Yeah, that won't be one of the options. So we'll see you later.